number that really bothers me. This is where I really struggle with keto. And we're going to talk about that a little down the line. We're going to get there. But first things first, let's talk about all this fat, right? Let's talk about all this fat. So, to do this right, you literally need to drink fat, right? As you guys know, you guys have all been shocked by the caloric need that I give you, right? When I tell you you need to eat this many calories or this is your macros, a lot of women are like, I don't know how you expect me to hit those numbers. That's so much food, right? It's more food than you expect. Now picture if you had way more fat added to that. You literally need to drink fat to make this work. So things like bulletproof coffee make up the majority of your diet. You're drinking constant MCT oil, you're supplementing butter, you're cooking things in bacon all day long, etc., etc. Does fat make you fat? No, of course not. That's technically impossible from a biochemistry standpoint unless under certain circumstances mixed with carbohydrates, blah, 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 blah. If you're eating low carb, fat is not going to make you fat, right? I'm a huge fan of fat. It's a superfood. Most of your daily calories on the Clovis protocol come from fat, just not this high. So my question is, I'm a fan of fat. Do I think you should be slurping up as much fat as humanly possible when your goal is to burn stored body fat? Probably not, especially if you're overweight, right? The fat you're adding to the bloodstream very well can and probably will be burned for energy before your triglycerides, your stored fat, depending on the type of fat you're ingesting. It's like the gas tank with glucose all over again. So let's dive into the gas tank analogy. This is everybody's favorite. Every time I talk about the gas tank, people go, that visual is amazing, right? We talk about it as we have this gas tank, and I cut it in half, and I say, this is your glucose, then you have the detox, and then you have fat, right? So today, we're going to assume that fat adaptation has already happened, right? So fat adaptation has already happened. We're going to assume that you're here. This is just fat, okay? So you have full, you have empty. This is just fat. So erase that whole top portion is already gone from that gas tank. So you have no glucose in your system, your glycogen stores are depleted, you're now fat adapted, you're burning fat for energy, right? So what happens here is when fat is ingested, depending on the state of the body, whether you're fed or fasted, and all that means is fed meaning insulin levels and blood glucose levels are high, fasted meaning that insulin levels are low and blood glucose levels are low, all right? So depending on what state you're in, the ingested fat must be either burned or stored, okay? Now, even if you're following a strict ketogenic diet or fasting, if you're constantly adding fats to the diet like MCTs take priority. They must be burned because they can't be stored. So let me erase this a little bit and let's talk like this, right? This is your body fat, okay? So let's call this body fat. Now let's say your body fat is here, okay? This is all body fat. You want to burn this stored body fat, right? So you've already gone through the glucose, you've gone through the glycogen, you're through your detox, you're fat adapted, and you want to burn this body fat. But because of these keto protocols, you're drinking MCT oils, or you're taking exogenous ketones, or you're cooking everything in butter, or everything in bacon grease, or whatever. So what's happening is things like MCTs are adding fuel, right? So as long as you're doing this, we'll call this exogenous fat, right? As long as this exogenous fat is just coming in, topping off the tank, your body's just gonna live right here, burning this fat that you're putting in the system, right? So as long as you're just adding exogenous, basically MCT is as close to an exogenous ketone as you're gonna get, besides like a beta-hydroxybutyrate supplement, right? So as long as you're supplementing all this additional fat, you're not gonna tap into these body fat stores. Now granted, I'm talking about particular fats like MCTs, but really any ingested fat over here. Now what's gonna happen is ingested fat is treated just like stored fat in your adipose tissue, right? So it's gonna be burned or it's gonna be stored. Now if you're in this fasted state, it's probably going to get burned. So what happens is they literally mix together. The dietary fat, the ingested fat as triglycerides, and the triglycerides found in your adipose tissue, they're both mixing together, they're being burned, they're being stored, they're coming in and out of the cells constantly in what's called like a turnover pool, right? So they're both getting burned. They're getting mixed together and burned. But my question is, ask yourself, wouldn't you prefer that most of the fat being burned comes from your stored body fat? Of course, right? So don't get me wrong, I am a fan of most of your daily calories coming from dietary fats. I'm simply saying, Don't drink fat through a straw until you can't move, right? So eating truly ketogenic levels of fat is very difficult each and every day, day in, day out, to do that consistently and keep up with that compliance rate, right? This is another reason why I generally can't use full keto with athletes. I work with glycolytic athletes, particularly fighters, right? Their caloric need is so high that to put them at 78% daily calories from fat, they would literally be drinking olive oil in a glass. Like, they would be drinking olive oil by the glass, literally, to make that kind of caloric need with 78% coming from fat, right? Now, if you saw pictures of my MMA fighter, Peta, she's posed like this, 12-pack abs, she's sub 10% body fat. She can't rely on stored body fat for energy, right? She can't rely on this. She doesn't have enough. And there's something called essential body fat. If your body creeps up on that, it will stop burning body fat, right? So if she's low carb, now I have to supplement things like ketones, things like MCT oils. She's taking like 4 servings of paleo powder a day. We actually do exogenous ketones when she's doing 2-a-day trainings, right? But for overweight people, this makes no sense because there's plenty of body fat to spare, okay? This is why I generally recommend 60% daily calories from fat, not 70, 78. But remember, fat is the most calorically dense macronutrient on Earth at 9 calories per gram. So a difference, if I'm talking 60, right? This difference of 18%, I mean, you're talking a difference of 18% of your daily calories coming from fat at 9 calories a gram. That's easily 30 to 60 grams of extra fat, depending on the individual and their caloric need. That's a huge difference. That is a huge difference, right? Like an average bulletproof coffee, I think is like 24 grams of fat or something like that. You're talking between 30 to 60 extra grams of fat. Now, to keep in mind, I'm a big fan of the keto diet. I am not trashing keto at all. I'm just explaining that in the beginning, the supplementation of ketones makes sense because the body doesn't know how to burn fat. You're teaching it how to burn fat with easy to convert to energy fatty acids such as MCT oils. You give it MCT oil, the body knows how to burn those. So that's basically warming up the body to burn body fat, right? You're teaching it to do something. So in the beginning, you're gonna see drastic fat loss with these overweight people. But I see a lot of people plateau. And every time someone plateaus on keto, they are always treating fat as a supplement, right? More fat, more fat, more fat. Eating, drinking as much fat as possible. It's all about bacon and bacon grease and avocados and butter and MCT oil and coconut oil, right? As much fat as possible all the time. And they can't figure out why they're plateauing. You're not giving the body a chance to burn the freaking body fat that's stored in your body, right?